Welcome back to this three-part series where we're talking about sustainability. This video is all about communication, and it is how you can really help yourself not be the best kept secret. In this video, you're going to hear from a communications expert, so it's not just me. I have a guest on our Social Impact Level Up podcast who recently told me all about how we communicate to sustain our work. Eric Ressler from Cosmic Inc. is going to share his genius with us. And this video is little clips of me helping you dissect that information and take action on it. Now, of course, communication for sustainability starts from the beginning. And if you haven't done this, you probably likely are the best kept secret. Now, what are some of the things that you can do in order to make sure that you sustain your work and communicate about it, even if you're at the end of something that you started? This video will help you think about how you can use brand marketing as not only an organization and a program. Also, if you have limited resources, there are some strategies that you can use to help you communicate about what you've been doing and how you've been successful. The last thing we're going to layer in is a little bit of marketing and how you can tailor that for your program and the audiences that you need to reach so that they can support your work. Each segment, you'll hear Eric, and then I'll pop in with a little bit of wisdom, and hopefully you'll enjoy all of the tips and what we have to share. Before we start this video, don't forget if you missed any of the previous two videos on sustainability, first one is on reflections, the second one is on funding, head over to the playlist or go back into my YouTube channel and make sure you take a peek at those.
Often what we see is a lot of organizations focused on mission, and that's great. That's a great inclination. But you also need to focus on communication and around spreading the word around how your mission is actually moving forward, especially to your supporters that already are supporting you, so that they know that their investment, whether they're a donor for a nonprofit or they're a customer of a more product or market focused organization, the social enterprise, donors and supporters of your mission, however they're supporting you, they want to know that you're making a difference, right? And so if you're keeping all of your impact, tucked away as a secret, that is a huge mistake. Like we need to communicate. And so marketing at the end of the day is really about communication. It's not necessarily just about selling. It's about building awareness, but it's also about educating, about inspiring, telling stories of hope, stories of success.
Here's the sustainability model that we've been using for this video series. Communications and marketing is definitely on the list, and it plays a big role because, again, we don't want you to be the best kept secret. Ultimately, it's the key to sustainability because the people who matter are the people who are going to support you in the long run. If you are someone who has been working on a grant program or has been funded by a particular funder and you need to move over to other funding streams, the second video will really help you out in thinking about that. But now it's time to communicate your message to all of these people who matter. The people who you might be thinking about communicating to at this phase of your work might include federal, state, or local legislators, philanthropic organizations, news outlets, potential partners, or others who you can inspire to donate or support you in some way. Again, if you're at the end of a funding cycle, telling your story really matters. Sometimes you can use certain tips and tricks in order to do this in a little more efficient and effective way. Tally up your data early. Make sure if you have preliminary results that you are sharing those. They're equally as important as your final results. If you have any outcomes, you can share them on social media, and you can even do lives with people that you've transformed their lives through your work. It's never too late to start communicating your message to the audiences that matter. Let's keep going and learn more how we can communicate and market our work.
This distinction between what we refer to as a brand building approach to marketing and a more transactional approach to marketing. And I think there's been a shift more broadly that's spilling over into social impact organizations around marketing becoming so much more transactional. And I think a lot of that is because technology has given us a lot more data to work with from a marketing perspective around engagement and analytics and some of these things. And so marketers are now trained to measure impact based on numbers and data around conversions, around impressions, around reach, all of these kind of signals of engagement. And I think those signals are important to look at. But I think the bigger trend is that we're losing sight of what is the purpose of doing brand marketing in the first place. And the purpose of that, really, at the end of the day, is to forge deeper relationships and to build community. And so, if all you're doing all day is looking at numbers, but you're losing sight of the bigger impact and the bigger signals of impact, such as relationship building, community building, growth, revenue, some of those things, then you're not measuring the right things and what you measure matters.
One of the things that you should be paying attention to is what is the digital footprint of your programs, your organization, and your partnerships. If you have work at all three of these levels, or if you're working on one of these levels under a grant, it's really important to understand what the work that you've communicated looks like to the public. Might they be confused about who you are and your identity and your significance? If that happens, they're less likely to support you in the long run. So thinking about your digital footprint matter. We mentioned some of the metrics that you could look at in this video, but you can also just do a simple survey online by using a poll feature on any of your social media platforms. You can put out some key messages and see what resonates with people, and you can ask people what they thought you did well. There's so many different ways that you can gather data using the tools that you already have. You don't need to make it complicated. If you have limited resources, there are also strategies that you can put in place. Let's continue with the conversation and learn how you can do more.
What's one action someone can do to really help themselves at this point?
Yeah. So if you're really constrained by resources or time, and what I would say is like everyone feels that way, no matter where you are in your journey. One is going back to that concept of learning how can you actually craft content that's scroll stopping, that breaks through in our world where so much of what we see is driven by algorithms and their preferences, right? So whether you're in a social media channel or even email to some degree these days, because our inboxes are so noisy. So you should spend roughly 50% of your time on content creation, crafting your subject line, and then 50% on the email itself, as just an example. If no one clicks the email, it doesn't even matter what's in it, right? So, and that's just one example. But if you think about that packaging and framing of the content for anything, so like this podcast or a video that you make or a report or an article that you write, you have to figure out how you can package content in a way that actually stops people on their scroll, gets them to pay attention and to engage. So the main thing around crafting hooks that work are and you've seen this taken to the extreme. This is clickbait, right? Where there's this curiosity gap. You say some kind of something that's like shocking or controversial or you don't you kind of like create this open loop and it kind of hacks your human psychology. You're like, I just have to see what the answer to this is, even if I don't really care about it, right? So that's like clickbait to the extreme. But some of those same principles can be used responsibly and skillfully to capture people's attention to make it more likely that they'll actually engage in whatever piece of content that you have. So some really high level tips: create hooks that create a curiosity gap, make people want to stop, and also have some sort of emotional appeal, right? That actually kind of tap into emotions. So, fear is one that works quite well, but should not be overused or you just start to get really negative. So that's one side. The second side is what I would refer to as essentially like a distribution first approach to content creation. So again, rather than saying, okay, we're going to write an article and then we're going to promote that article, you really need to kind of reverse engineer that. So understanding like who is the audience for this given piece of content, what is kind of the content pillar that this fits within, and with a distribution first approach what you're really looking at is like who is this piece of content for, what are the channels that we know that audience tends to hang out in, and then what are the formats that work well in that channel. And then the other thing I would say about distribution first is that is really about how can you get the most out of any piece of content effort that you're creating. So things like if it is a long form thing like this podcast, for example, can we chop it up into short segments that get dripped out over a couple of weeks? Can we break it down into a transcript and an article so that if someone wants to consume it that way? So just like squeezing the most out of any piece of content that you're creating.
Now, here's a hack. How can you take the longer forms of content that you've created for your funder or for other purposes and use it to tell the story of your work? Can you take all these calls to action and hooks and add them to content that you already have to make sure that people know that you aren't the best kept secret, that you are a group that matters, that you are a program that works, that you are a partnership that gets results? Creativity and content generation might be in a different part of your organization, and it might be difficult to communicate these outcomes to them. But if you can find a way to share information, share data and resources, and make sure that everyone understands the story of what you have been able to accomplish, this will help your sustainability immensely. You can prepare this information in data briefs, small snippets of information that could be shared, or even infographics that tell more about what you've been able to accomplish. All of these ways to share your story are important, and you should be exercising as many as you have the bandwidth to.
When you're at the sort of end of something, I think I hear this from a lot of clients, especially coalitions and partnerships, who get to the end of a grant and then they realize that they did not communicate their successes. They stayed the best kept secret for the last 5, 10 years. And then it's time to do something that's going to be sustainable, ideally get some more supporters and money in the door to take over for the funding that they're losing. So what could you say to folks who find themselves in that predicament of how marketing maybe could support even upstream or at that crisis point, what they're trying to do to continue to maintain the work that they were doing under a funding stream that's no longer available?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I'll say is that funders need to start building budget in for communications because it's hard, or funders need to really be more willing to support organizations with general operating funds so they can spin up their own marketing and communications programs. Because I think what often happens is for certain organizations, almost all of their funds are restricted to specific grants or programs, which doesn't give them enough, general operating cash to invest in the organization, in their own team, into marketing and communications. So we have to ideally do both, right? And also, we need to build in communications budget into program work because it is such an important part. And the amount is going to differ depending on what kind of program it is. If it's a public health program, a lot of it maybe should be around building a public health campaign around that program, because if no one knows about the program, they won't participate in the first place, right? So you have to right size it depending on the type of program. So I acknowledge that, but in my opinion, almost every program or grant should include a certain amount of budget for marketing, communications, and some of those elements. So if you find yourself as an organization in a place where you got to the end and you realized, oops, like we didn't communicate about this, ideally you would be doing general marketing and communications work anyway, and you could look at this as opportunities for ideas for content, right? And so going back again to that distribution first mindset, like, okay, you've got all of these different ideas. Let's reverse engineer instead of saying, okay, we have to communicate about this grant. Who's the audience? What are the channels? How can we reach them? What formats work? Okay, now look back at that content. What from that program might lend itself to these channels, to these different formats that work in these channels for these audiences? That's a high level answer.
I like the backwards engineering because I think people would normally be panicky and start saying, "Oh, our grant is ending. Give us money for this thing,"
Yeah.
rather than saying, "Oh, we achieved these amazing outcomes for these kiddos or whatever we did, and would you want us to continue to do this?" I think it's really flipping the script on how some of the things that have been happening in the impact sector for years, of how you're really creating more dependency in organizations versus independent organizations.
Now, let's get real for a second. Communicating about your work is an entirely other job. And if you are at the end of an initiative and you're thinking about sustainability, there's no way you have time for that. So, what are some things that you can do that you must do to make sure that you sustain your program or move on with your work in a reasonable manner? Of course, setting expectations for people around us, we want to make sure that we are putting our best foot forward in the community. So, here are a couple tips of things that I have seen other programs do and navigate, maybe not in the best ways, but you can do much better with a little bit of planning and foresight. So, communicating early with your staff, if there are positions that are no longer going to be funded, it's important to think about what is the sustainability of that and communicating for at least 6 months in advance with staff members what their fate might be so they have ample time to make plans. Telling clients and partners who might be depending on you how they might navigate any need that came up with your service is no longer available. Letting anybody know that you've been working with, that you're winding down, and if you're sunsetting any of your programs, making sure that you give them other options in advance notice. And of course, telling any clients that you are serving what they might be able to do in the future with you is equally important. if you have other options for services they might be able to access. And lastly, of course, thanking the community for allowing you to serve them. Communications at the end of a transition period has to be both internal and external, and always making sure that we're putting the community and the people that we serve at the heart of it. And of course, it can get quite complex as you have to take all of these actions, but don't worry, as much as you can, telling your story matters no matter when you do it, even if it's at the end or the beginning of something that you're planning to do. Maybe if you've had a transition, you're changing backbone organization, or you have a new chapter of your story, it always matters. Make sure you think about the long format, short format, and the easy to access ways that you can give pieces of information and bite-sized nuggets from that story. This is the third video of our sustainability series. It is the final video. Make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel for more series and more information like this.